Alright, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be the latest installment into a series that I've started recently called Black Man, Do You Need Mental Help? And this edition is going to be featuring none other than Mr. Delonte West, the former guard of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Boston Celtics, and other teams. He's also known as the dude that was giving the pipe to LeBron James's mom back in the day. And it would not surprise me if some of the mental or psychological descent that Delonte has experienced over the last decade or so may have been due to a backstage blackballing executed by Mr. LeBron James. It would not shock me at all. Am I going to just directly point the finger at just him? No, not necessarily. But I do believe that LeBron has something to do with Delonte's fall from grace per se. And I'm not going to necessarily blame LeBron for that. If I myself happened to be on a professional sports team and had a so-called teammate who decided that they were going to try to inject themselves into my personal life by initiating a relationship with a family member of mine, number one, I would probably blame myself, because 99 times out of 100, if someone in your professional environment is able to initiate a personal relationship with someone in your family, it's because you acted as the gateway, as the mediator. And that's why I always tell you, brothers, to keep your professional separate from your personal. But just getting back to the point, LeBron James was young and dumb, and he really viewed his teammates as his family at that time. I think that he's grown and learned that there's a difference between your professional family and your personal family. And he's learned a bit more on how to keep those things separate. But just getting back to the point, it would not shock me at all if one of the reasons why Delonte West has had these series of mental breakdowns is not only because he's suffering from some type of psychological disorder, but also because there are some movers and shakers behind the scenes who are pulling puppet strings and stopping him from being able to continue to be an NBA basketball player. And we know that that time has passed for him anyway. But when you're unable to do what you love to do and what you may feel like you were born to do because of a situation that occurred, that might lead to some mental degradation. Who the hell knows? But I always say this, brothers have to make sure that they put the Most High first. That's going to be your wisdom and your stability in these last days. Stay in your scriptures and keep the Most High first. Not a job, not a woman, not a profession. All those things can and will pass, especially in this modern day Babylon that we live in, where everything is so come and go, so flighty. You never know what tomorrow is going to bring. So you have to be anchored in something that's stable and steady. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Welcome to TMZ Sports. Michael J. Babcock here with two-time WNBA champion Renee Montgomery. What's up, Renee?
Hello there, Babcock.
I'm glad you're back, Renee. I missed you yesterday, Renee. I know we have Mike Tyson.
Well, you had Mike Tyson here. I don't think you missed me that much.
He can't fill your shoes.
God.
He's great, but not the greatness of you. All right, let's get into it. We have a lot of big, really important stories to get into today. We're going to start with one that is shocking, sad, surprising. I don't even know if I have the right words.
I'm not quite sure if it's shocking, sad, or any of those things. We've known for years that Delonte has had these mental issues. A lot of so-called black men are suffering from mental issues. Now, they might be diagnosed as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or what have you. But really what it is the so-called black man is not centered and focused on what his power is supposed to be. And when you're unplugged from your power source, you're going to start searching for other things to satiate that need for a foundation. So many so-called black men are not rooted in anything because they're being raised in these environments where they're encouraged to seek after materialism. It's about accumulation and validating yourself to the outside world. And when you're unable to do that, you start to lose confidence and self-esteem. And that's always going to happen when you're trying to live for other people. Most people do not matter. The vast majority of people that you encounter in your life going into the 99.9th percentile are not going to matter in the long run. The vast majority of people out here are two-dimensional and they're playing characters. They don't even know who the fuck they are. That's why they don't know how to love or be loyal. There's no sense of that, because in order for you to truly love, you have to be giving. You actually have to be able to think about something other than your own gratification. Most people do not have that ability. It's all about them. And so many so-called black boys are being raised with that mindset imbued upon them. And especially in a society like this that holds young black males with such little value, or to such little value, Of course, eventually it's going to lead to a series of mental problems because you're trying to figure out where do you belong.
It's more troubling news about former NBA star Delonte West. Of course, Delonte was a star at St. Joe's in Pennsylvania, went on, was a first-round draft pick, played 8 seasons.
And by the way, not to digress, but cats like Delonte West, Chris Broussard, Stephen Curry, they would have been referred to during the medieval time period as red. For example, in medieval Scotland, you had the Black Douglases and the Red Douglases. The Red Douglases would have looked something like a Delonte West or Chris Broussard or Stephen Curry. Curry, by the way, is a Scottish last name. Then you had the Black Douglases, who would have looked like a Michael Jordan or Wesley Snipes, etc. So the disparity amongst so-called black people has existed for a very long time. I just want to touch on that because when I see cats who look like this, it conjures up in my mind a lot of the medieval designations for race or for quote-unquote skin color or physical depiction that might confuse brothers today who are delving into that level of research. But once again, the Red Douglases in medieval Scotland would have looked a lot like a Delonte West or Stephen Curry. King Henry VIII also looked a lot like this cat right here when it comes to his complexion, his hair, etc. King Henry VIII was described as having red hair, just like this cat right here.
Cavs had a really nice NBA career, but over the last few years, we have seen these troubling images of Delonte, and he is clearly...
As we can also see, Delonte West wears number 13, so it would not shock me at all if Delonte West is a Monarch programmed athlete who was never fully able to come to fruition in what they may have had scripted for him in the NBA. He was linked up with a LeBron James. He may have just been a character scripted into LeBron James's life storyline to bring confusion into LeBron's life and necessitate that move to Miami. So he could very well be a scripted character. It would not surprise me at all. But whenever you see that number 13 is for the divine clown. We've gone over this before. It's for the quote-unquote serpent.
Doing well, and unfortunately,
at least in reference to the programming. I mean, it's not like everyone who has that number is a programmed athlete, but many times that's the case, especially if they're allowed to gain any level of prominence or they become known through the global entertainment sphere in that narrative.
We got another one of those photographs yesterday. As you'll see, Delonte was in the street in Dallas asking motorists for money because he doesn't have money to live. And it's just super sad. And everybody has been saying, Renee, why is this guy who had a long professional career in athletics, why is he not getting any help? Well, I spoke to some people, multiple people who know Delonte and are close to him, and they have said that not only is the NBA and the Players Association, not only have they been trying to help Delonte, but Doc Rivers, Jameer Nelson, and some other coaches and teammates who have a relationship with Delonte, they've been trying to help, but their position is we can't make him take the help. We can only offer it. He's not willing to accept it. There's nothing we can do.
Or it could be that Delonte West just does not trust anyone associated with the NBA because he's dwelled within the NBA behind the curtain and he knows exactly what's going on there. Doc Rivers, in my view, is a handler. And very clearly a high-level Mason / Luciferian. That's why he's been included in so many of these Marxist storylines involving the Black Lesbians Matter movement and why he's been resituated over with the Philadelphia 76ers. And you should be able to see the link or the correlation, as I always tell you, brothers, and as many of you know already, they'll normally have a connection or correlation between something that you might think to be incidental. In the case of Doc Rivers, we know that the most famous player in the history of the 76ers is who? Dr. J. So now they have Doc Rivers, you had Dr. J, and Doc Rivers' job is to make sure that Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, who most likely are both MK programmed Monarch athletes, are able to ascend to their highest levels of proficiency. So expect the Philadelphia 76ers to be major players in the Eastern Conference this upcoming season. It's going to be the 76ers, the Brooklyn Nets, the Boston Celtics, the Miami Heat, and it would not shock me if the Milwaukee Bucks are able to pull off a blockbuster trade for maybe a James Harden. We'll see what happens.
It's just, isn't it so sad, though, to see a guy who was millions of people cheered for this guy, and he gave people joy. And to see him living in the street now, it's so hard to accept.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm happy to hear that the NBPA and the NBA and the people that know him have tried to reach out. But what they're saying is actually common. When people are suffering from mental health disease and different illnesses, like they don't know they need help. You know, they almost feel like they want to be in that environment. They thrive that environment. And it's sad to see because, as we know, we've seen him at his at the top where
and sometimes the pressure can just be too much. We know that he recently had a child maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know where the quote-unquote baby mama is at. I'm not going to necessarily blame her for his situation or his condition, but I guarantee you that normally if you have a man who's going through some level of psychological or mental breakdown, there's a relationship issue involved in there somewhere. Somewhere in there, if she was not the person to start pushing him towards the cliff, the breakdown of the relationship between him and her may have pushed him over the cliff. Who knows? But he's someone who clearly is mentally fragile or fractured anyway.
As you said, fans cheering his name, making millions in the NBA, and now to be in the position he's in the state he's in. I also think about, you know, he's one of the ones that we see now, and you can clearly tell, but always take these moments that everyone should check on their friends. You know, mental health is something that a lot of people suffer from, and I'm sure there's times in...
Right, well, if you're going to check on your friends, do it with a sense of sincerity. Don't be the person to ask your friend what's going on, and then as soon as they tell you and they're transparent, you want to run around and tell everybody else and be a gossip monger, which is why a lot of people keep their business to themselves, and you never truly find out what they're going through until they're in a state of destitution, like a Delonte West. Because so many people are disingenuous and they just want to get into your business and act like they care about you when they really don't.
His life where people saw signs. You know, I'm sure that this didn't come completely out of left field, so I'm sure that some people saw signs somewhere, so that...
Now look at this photo right here. I always tell you, brothers, many times they tell the truth within the pictorials. Why would they show a photo of LeBron James, this freeze frame of him appearing to laugh maniacally as he looks down with a sinister look on his face in the midst of this storyline? Could it be that he's the one involved, or he's the great architect of the disenfranchisement of Mr. Delonte West? Could that be the case? We see here LeBron James with the number 23, which represents the intertwining serpents or the DNA. He's looking down with a wicked look on his face, smiling maniacally. Now, of course, this is a freeze frame, so he could just be grimacing. But the photo is made to appear to show LeBron on a subliminal level as the quote-unquote villain here.
It's just a cue that if you know someone that is showing signs of mental health or illness or any other issues, depression, anything, you should reach out to them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think athletes have really done a great job over the last couple of years of showing that, like, you guys are not impervious to this. Like, athletes are people too, and you've seen like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan talk about dealing with depression and stuff.
Caleb McBride and the WNBA.
Brothers, let me say this. Do not let the mainstream media fool you. They're trying to act as if this is some new stage of the world that we're heading into where it's okay for men to be fully transparent about their mental fragility. No matter what they say, if a man comes out and says that he's having a very rough time of it psychologically, they're going to act as if they pity you, but they're never going to respect you as a leader. Paul George recently acknowledged that he was quote-unquote depressed while he was in the bubble. Of course, his Clipper teammates, they denied a lot of that. They asserted that the real reason why he was upset was because he was playing so poorly, because behind the scenes they can't stand Paul George. The point is this: very few people are going to care about the issues that the so-called black man is going through, no matter what they say. A lot of this shit is just for television. So if you're fortunate enough to have immediate family members or a friend or a significant other who actually really cares about you, stick to that. Do not make a practice of being fully transparent around strangers. Most people do not want to see you do well. Most people are trying to see if there are any moments of weakness or vulnerability that they can take advantage of. And that's to compensate for their own inner weaknesses. So make sure that you use discretion in who you divulge information to.
recently came out and like said she has bad anxiety. Like she has a lot of issues that bother her before games, but she handles it. But yeah, there used to be a huge stigma. So a lot of times with athletes, if you say that something's bothering you or you're sad, people will be like, yo, tighten up. You gotta be mentally tough. Like,
you do have to tighten up to a degree. People can act like we're no longer in that stage or in that phase of existence. But every time you have a problem, you just can't start to complain. And this is also a part of the demasculinizing of American society. They're trying to make men more feminine so that the woman can catch up and assert herself as a quote-unquote leader. They need men to be quote-unquote more in touch with their feminine side so that they'll be open to manipulation by the mainstream media and by the liberal woman. Always remember, we're all going to go through shit in life, but you have to figure out what the solution is to the problem that you're having. If you're in a relationship with a woman and it's stressing you out, you have to start to evaluate, is it worth it? Is she bringing as much to the table as she's taking away with her negativity? If you're at a job that is causing you stress or any type of anxiety, you should leave that job. Of course, you cannot leave that day, but you should start to plot and plan out what your next steps are going to be to move on to an environment that's more conducive to what you love to do and what you're gifted at. And it's more fulfilling for your nature, your spirit, or what have you. You can't just stay in a situation or in an environment that is not helping you out.
Used to be the whole culture,
right.
But
or you have a lot of money, so what are you complaining about? You hear that a lot.
Yes, exactly.
The reason why these guys are so downtrodden spiritually, even though they have a lot of money, is because the more money you make, especially if there's fame accompanying it, the faker the people are around you. Once again, the vast majority of people have no idea why they're here on the earth. So what they do is they adopt characters for themselves to play. Most of these dudes, they marry women and they think the woman really loves them until they become disenfranchised, until they lose their job or they lose their money, and then you find out. Brothers, the vast majority of women in Babylon don't even know how to love. They're too self-centered, they're too narcissistic. But the media will not state that because they have an agenda to promote the woman as this goddess. 80% of NFL players get divorced 2 years after their retirement from the NFL because the marriage was never legitimate to begin with. So a lot of times, the money brings more problems, as Biggie Smalls stated 23 years ago. So it's not all about how much money you make. It's about you understanding who's there for you as opposed to who isn't. And even immediate family members can turn against you if you start to become rich or wealthy. Look at Kobe Bean Bryant. His mother and his father were his handlers, and they turned against him because he started to reject their control and their direct manipulation.
Exactly. And so now when you see this happen, it's shocking to people. But again, throughout 2020, we've noticed that athletes are human.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't actually the first time, sadly, that we have seen Delonte West like this. This really all started back in 20.
And I'm not quite sure if you brothers see that, but some of the tattoos that Delonte West has on his body are, in my view, an allusion to his programming. He has the crooked cross tatted on his neck with the crown on top of it, which clearly to me denotes that his king is quote-unquote Tammuz. We also see the fleur-de-lis sprouting out from the 4 points of the cross. The fleur-de-lis, or the flower of life, is once again an allusion to the great Joker, or the quote-unquote great god of mischief. So it would not surprise me at all if Delonte West is a programmed asset.
Really all started.
And also pay very close attention. Just going back to this photo once again. As stated, the tattoo on his neck is an allusion to the Joker. Look at the hat that the little boy is wearing.
Really all started back in 2016 when
he has a key tatted on his right hand. Keys, chains, locks are normally triggers that are associated with being MK programmed.
A fan saw Delonte outside of a Jack in the Box restaurant and what?
Yes, the fan saw Delonte West located outside of a Jack in the Box restaurant. The Jack in the Box is the quote-unquote divine clown, also known as Pan or Saturn. I went over this in the series that I did, which was loosely associated with the film Joker, called Send in the Clowns, just to show a lot of the various manifestations of the quote-unquote clown god entity. So it's clear to me, and becoming clearer, that the role of Delonte West in the overall entertainment sphere or script was to act as the antagonist or a antagonist for LeBron James.
To him, Renee, and said, "Hey, are you Delonte West?" And Delonte said something to the effect of, "Not anymore." So he had...
Yes, that means multiple personality disorder. That was a character that he was playing in the NBA.
Completely separated himself from that basketball star. Then earlier this year, Delonte was allegedly involved in a fight on the street in Washington, D.C. So clearly, this is not the latest incident. He's had incidents in the past. I think, like you said, it's good to know that there are people out there that are trying to help, that they haven't abandoned this guy. And I think everybody is really just hoping the same thing, that Delonte West will finally accept the help and he can get himself right again, so he doesn't have to be out there living on the street.
Right, but do the people who claim they want to help him actually want to help him? Or do they just want to bring him back in to be reprogrammed? Once again, he might know more than the average person about what the NBA is actually about. Okay, so brothers, now we're going to continue the Delonte West narrative. Strangely enough, Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, has decided that he's going to inject himself into the storyline involving Delonte West to create an aura around himself as a quote-unquote savior figure. Please keep in mind that Mark Cuban has bandied about the notion that he may run for president in 2024 or 2028, somewhere around that time period. So could this be some brand building for Mark Cuban, who, as we know, has been raked over the coals over the last few years, particularly by the Me Too movement, involving some supposedly misogynistic atmospheric issues within his organization, the Dallas Mavericks. He might be trying to rebrand himself through the quote-unquote race dynamic right now. It would not surprise me or shock me at all. But there are a lot of things that Mark Cuban knows about the NBA. Of course, he's been an owner for over 20 years. So Delonte West may be an asset that he wants to pick up off the street and use for his own will, or use for his own whims per se.
We got a big story to lead off the show today and some positive news. Now, first, I'm sure everybody remembers last week, Delonte West, former NBA star, former college basketball star, really looking to be in a bad way. Another photograph showing Delonte on the streets of Dallas holding a sign, panhandling. This is a guy who made something like $14 million in his career. And last week, again, it became very clear that Delonte was in desperate need of help. And that brings us to our update here, because we finally have some good news, Renee. So Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, obviously a team that Delonte played for in 2011, 2012, met up with Delonte at a Dallas gas station yesterday with the hopes of actually bringing Delonte to a hotel where he was safe and then ultimately getting him into a rehab center. But first, we actually have video from inside the gas station and from outside the gas station when Mark Cuban picked up Delonte West, his former player. Check this out.
Delonte West. Go Mavericks.
Now that's an example of the bitch-ass society that we're living in today, where gay-ass dudes looking for clout decide that they're going to record people without their knowledge and without their consent, just so that they can upload it to some social media website and get a few subscribers or get some quote-unquote clout for themselves. I mean, come on, man. He's a grown-ass man. Leave that man alone. He's at the counter at some, at some gas station somewhere, some convenience store. Leave the dude alone. Or maybe that's the person that Mark Cuban paid to follow Delonte West around and record him picking up Delonte West and playing the white liberal superhero out to save so-called black men, as I've stated in other videos and other series. This society views the so-called black man as a stray dog. They expect you to be extremely grateful and obedient if they decide to come down from heaven and save you out of that alleyway where you eat garbage. They'll bring you into their home, and then you can reconvene with the black woman who's there as a maid. That's how they view the so-called black woman, as a maid. She's above you, but remember, the so-called white man loves his dog. So what they'll do many times is they will allow the dog to ascend to a certain level of prominence in the sports world or the entertainment industry because the so-called white man views the dog as his best friend. So who's making all the money in this society? Through the prison industrial complex, through the sports industry, so on and so forth. It's the so-called black man. Just in and of himself, the so-called black man is worth probably well over $1 trillion in revenue for the United States every year. When you combine the entertainment industry, the drug trade, the workforce, the prison industrial complex, and even what the so-called black man brings to the armed forces. So this was a stunt by Mark Cuban for notice and for attention. No doubt about it in my mind.
Oh, man.
So, Renee, that Tesla that you saw outside, I know the video was kind of quick, was actually Mark Cuban's Tesla. Now, Mark Cuban's a billionaire who could have sent somebody. He didn't have to do this himself, but he...
Exactly. He decided to do it himself because he wanted to be seen. That's how you know, in my view, that the person who was filming Delonte West was probably paid by Mark Cuban to do so.
He drove himself to a gas station, and again, he picked Delonte West up. Now, the background to this story was, and we talked to numerous people who were close to Delonte's family. Delonte had sent a concerning text to Delonte's mom, and Mark Cuban had actually reached out to Delonte's mom and said, "How can I help?" Delonte's mom told Mark, "Please find my son." And that's exactly what Mark did. Over a few-day period, he had been trying to track down Delonte. He finally was able to do that. Delonte admitted where he was, and that's what led up to what you just saw on our video there, where Mark met Delonte. Now, the really great news here is that Delonte got on an airplane and flew from Dallas, Texas, to Florida, where he has entered a rehab facility, and he is currently
a rehab facility or a reprogramming facility. Once again, just my opinion, just my perspective on it. Delonte West is a modern athlete gone rogue, going through self-destruct programming.
Taking classes to deal with his substance abuse issues, and that's what a lot of people believe is really the root of all his problems. And this is just a really positive story in my mind.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, all of our hearts were hurting to see Delonte.
Stop lying. You don't give a shit about no damn Delonte West. These people get on TV and they talk all this nonsense about who they feel sorry for and who their heart is aching for because of the situation that they're going through. They don't give a flying fuck about no damn Delonte West.
West in that state, because we all know him as the NBA player, you know, and when you see an NBA player, you see almost like a superhuman action figure, you know.
No, all he is another man, and he has weaknesses like every man, and it's important for cats out there to understand that, because what this society promotes is idolatry, and she was trying to propagate that with her statement about how NBA players are superheroes. No, they're not. They're great athletes who can run and jump, and they work on their skills, and they should be respected for the way in which they perfect their skills. But they're not leaders. They're not superheroes.
Superhero. So just to see him in that state, it was hard to see. But, man, you have to just give Mark Cuban so much credit, because he carries himself a certain way. As you said, he could have easily sent out one of his gazillion employees. He's a billionaire, you know. He could have easily not wanted to drive his own car to pick up someone that you know is living on the streets. Yeah. You know, he could have easily been that guy, and he wasn't. It takes allyship, and we talk about this a lot.
Right, well, the question is, why did he decide to not be that guy? Is it just because he's so magnanimous, generous, and loving? Do you truly believe that Mark Cuban just heard that Delonte West was strung out and homeless and wandering the streets of wherever he's located or was located? Or do you think that he is utilizing this situation for his own benefit down the line? That's how a three-dimensional thinker operates. They say to themselves, okay, I can use this situation to advance my situation or some other situation that might transpire, 2 or 3 steps, hell, maybe even 4 steps after this one in 4 or 5 years, and build up some credibility with the so-called black community and with those who are handicapped by a psychological disorder.
in this time, but for him to reach out to his mom, I'm sure a lot of people reached out to his mom. You know, a lot of people saw that same video. A lot of people probably
Everyone except LeBron.
a text of concern, but Mark Cuban took it further, got him in a rehab facility in Florida. I mean, this is how you want all these stories to end. So, like, you love to see it.
Yeah, it's great. You know, when people are high and doing.
Keep in mind that Florida is viewed as the quote-unquote orange state. So many quote-unquote Masonic rituals of global importance are initiated within Florida, i.e. Trayvon Martin, so on and so forth, the NBA bubble tournament. A lot of these activities that are used or utilized in Florida are done so for ritualistic reason or for an esoteric purpose. Florida is known as the Orange State or the State of Enlightenment. I don't believe that Delonte West is being sent to Florida just so that he can be healed of his bipolar issue or his dissociative identity issue. It's most likely so that they can streamline his programming and send him back out to continue on in his duty.
And having success, you have a lot of people around you who want to help and be your friends, but I think you really find out who truly cares about you when you're down, and Delonte West was about as down as you could be. And I love what you said too about athletes being superheroes, and I think this shows everybody out there that addiction, there's no bounds. It doesn't matter how much money you have or how good you might be at basketball. It doesn't matter, and anybody can be affected by addiction, and Delonte got in the grasp of addiction, but because of people like Mark Cuban and his own willingness to finally help himself, I think things are pointing up for Delonte West.
Mark Cuban's my favorite shark. Just saying, I love Shark Tank. It's one of my favorite shows. He's my favorite shark.
I love Mark Cuban too. He is now my favorite. Mr. Wonderful is now second.
You see how easy it is to utilize situations for political gain? All politics is like the stock market for human beings. The stock market has a direct correlation with the mindset of the people. It's about belief in a product. In the case of politics, the product is the human being. If you're involved in a particular situation or scenario that puts you in a good light, especially according to the conventions of the society that you're living in, if you're able to grab the bull by the horns per se, especially in this time period where there's so-called racial unrest and people view that there's a lack of compassion on those who are downtrodden, you can certainly parlay this into something that's advantageous for you down the line if you're someone who's intrepid in that way, who's daring in that way. So we'll see if Mark Cuban decides to run for president in a few years. We'll see. And if he's going to try to continue to build up any level of equity with the so-called black community and other quote-unquote communities. He may even try to inject himself into the LGBT community as well with some type of stunt in the near future. We'll see. Okay, so brothers, now I believe that this is going to be the final component to the Delonte West issue. Mr. Darryl Strawberry, the former star outfielder of the New York Mets back in the 1980s. He also played with the Dodgers and the Yankees and a few other teams in the 90s. He's going to chime in and provide his perspective on what's transpiring with Delonte West. And he is going to say a few things that are revelatory, rather insightful and consistent with many of the things that I state pertaining to mental fracturing, multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, and the root of it. Pay very close attention to what Darryl Strawberry states.
This is a good story. It's going to start off a little sad, but it's going to end up on a positive note. So I want to let you know we're not going to a dark place. There's light at the end of this tunnel. Delonte West has been back in the news recently. The former NBA player, unfortunately, has fallen on some hard times. His journey, is widely documented. People have seen photos of him out on the street. There are, reports that he has been struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues and things like that. And he is not in a good place, to the point where recently Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, personally went over and met with Delonte in order to help him out. Got him checked into a treatment facility to try and help clean him up. Because it's sad. Nobody wants to see Delonte West, who was at one time a top athlete. I mean, he was in the NBA and he was a good player. And then, his life kind of fell apart, and Mark Cuban wanted to help him get his life back together. So he is currently in a treatment center trying to get cleaned up. And now there is another superstar who knows exactly what Delonte West is going through, and he wants to help him out. Babcock, you spoke with Darryl Strawberry, baseball great, who, you know, if you've read anything.
I'm not quite sure if I would call Darryl Strawberry a baseball great. When I think about Darryl Strawberry, I think about someone who's more of a sports might have been. And as I always state, the pictures speak volumes, especially the numerological aspect. As we can see here, Darryl wore number 18, which signifies 666. He was a great player, very impactful in the 1980s, but he fell off in the 90s because he just fell head over heels in love with drugs and the fast life. Nothing to root him.
Darryl Strawberry over the years, you know that substance abuse was something that really affected him for a very long period of time. But now he is clean and sober, and he wants to help.
Yeah, Darryl Strawberry is somebody, Evan, who's had an amazing baseball career, but was really one of the most physically gifted guys. And
absolutely. Other than Ken Griffey Jr., I can't think of a left-handed home run hitter who was natural, wasn't on roids, who had a more beautiful home run swing than Darryl Strawberry. The only one that I could think of who had a prettier home run swing was Ken Griffey Jr.
Was addiction that derailed his career. He was so good, he still had a great career, but it could have been so much better. And Darryl will tell you.
I wouldn't say that he had a great career. He had a nice career. He should be in the Hall of Fame if he'd have kept himself on the up and up.
And I was addicted to cocaine, and he was addicted to alcohol, and he struggled for a really long time, but he has now been sober for 11 plus years, and he, along with his wife, has dedicated his life to helping other people kick drugs. And Darryl sees, and I didn't tell him about what was happening with Delonte. He has been following Delonte West's story, and he really wants to help Delonte West. Once he gets out of rehab, make sure that he stays on the right path. And Delonte West can live a very productive life with Darryl's help.
Here's a clip from that conversation between Mike Babcock and Darryl Strawberry. Take a look.
Well, Delonte West is just like anyone else that probably have some deep-rooted issues and that's never been dealt with. You know, putting on a basketball uniform and being successful, that just covers up everything that happens to a person. So it reflects back to when he was probably young somewhere, some kind of trauma, abuse or something.
You hear that, brothers? Darryl Strawberry states Delonte West problems most likely come from childhood abuse, i.e. sexual abuse, which is a core component for programming. Is to sexually, ritualistically abuse a child, normally starting at around the age of 4 months old. No later than 4 years old. But that's normally when that abuse starts. Whenever I see someone who has multiple personality issues or bipolar disorder, as they call it, and also accompanies it with all types of tattoos on their body, that tells me that they're trying to hide their embarrassment about the issues that they bottled up within one of the many compartments in their mind, and they're trying to create new characters to convince people that they actually, number one, know who they are, and number two, love who they are. And most people like that, neither one is the case. They don't know or love who they are. They're trying to hide, much like what Darryl Strawberry has stated.
Affected him and leave you crippled and paralyzed. So no one signs up, to be in that situation he's in. I didn't sign up to be in that situation. And I just want him to know that people like me that's in recovery, been in recovery for a long time, is praying for him and thinking about him. And if there's anything I can ever do to encourage him and sit down and have a talk with him, I just hope he can reach out and do that.
I love that Darryl Strawberry is so involved and wants to help. I think that's so important because you see some people that have struggled with the stuff to make it through and then move on with their lives, but to see Darryl Strawberry say, wait a second, I made it through and I can't just turn my back on other people who are struggling. I want to make a point to go help other people. Tons of respect to Darryl Strawberry. The other important part of the story that what I've learned from covering, stories like this for as long as I've been at TMZ is the only true way to beat addiction is if the person who's suffering from it really wants to make change. You can't force change on somebody. So I'm hoping that Delonte has really had.
Well, the number one way to beat addiction is to never become addicted in the first place. And I'm sure that sounds almost impossible to people who are listening to this video. A lot of people might say, what the hell are you talking about? You won't know what you're going to become addicted to until you try it. Well, There are certain things that we know at this point you really shouldn't try, like hard drugs, etc. If you're a so-called black man out there and you're trying to keep your mind sharp, you should not even be experimenting with hard drugs. And most of you cats know my stance on quote-unquote marijuana. That's just a drug that people use to forget exactly what their problems are. I get so many cats, oh, that's not true. I could tell you've never tried weed. When I smoke weed, I feel even more intelligent and more perceptive. Well, that's just you, because that's altering your state. I promise you, you cannot have an intelligent conversation when you're high on that shit. You just think that you are. Because you're having a quote-unquote build with another weed head, not with someone who's sharp. I've been around drug users my whole life, just growing up where I grew up. None of you came off as intelligent. No disrespect. None of you. Whenever I interacted with you, whether it was at school or round the way, on the block or what have you, you thought that you had your shit together, but you really didn't.
I'm reflecting, really wants the help. And if he does want the help, does he have the resources?
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that I think about, just mental health in sports, like that's a stigma. And so he talked about it. You put on the jersey and you're supposed to forget about it. But in sports, if you talk about like past trauma or you talk about any type of problems, people are going to tell you to be mentally tough and like, oh, shake it off. Come on.
Once again, that's why you have psychiatrists, psychotherapists. You should not be trying to get transparent with average people. Average people do not even know how to deal with their own problems, much less yours. How they're going to help you deal with your problems is by telling your problems to other people so that they can feel better about their own problems. When your friends become your foes, out the window your story goes.
You're this player or something.
Right.
So what he's talking about is important because Delonte West, even while he's battling addiction, you know, he might still have that athletic mentality that, no, I'm good. And to your point, Evan, yeah, he's not going to.
Well, I think even he knows at this point that he's not good. It's just that he'd rather be where he's at to try to escape whatever he's running from.
Help until he realizes, no, you're.
Which Darryl Strawberry, in my view, directly and correctly deduced as some childhood trauma, which was most likely utilized to bring out the best in him as a basketball player. Once again, sexual ritualistic abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, an attempt to push the asset to the furthest reaches of their capabilities are some of the many techniques that are used to create monarch athletes and monarch assets in the entertainment industry, government, so on and so forth, sports, or what have you.
Good. Like, you're not good even if you just get off of drugs. Like, you need to address the real problem. So
I was watching ESPN and they stated that Vasily Lomachenko's father had him swim across a lake when a storm was coming, and he walked away as his son was swimming across the lake so that Vasily would be forced to understand that he was on his own, and whatever happened, he was going to have to find his own way out of it. I also heard Jamal Murray talk about how his father would make him do push-ups in the snow. That shit has nothing to do with basketball, but those are mind control programming techniques.
in sports right now, again, like there's a lot of things that are being talked about that were never really addressed before in sports.
Back up. So what happens next? What goes on? What happens here?
Well, Delonte's obviously in treatment now, and I know Darryl, he specifically told me, I don't want to interfere with the program that he's going through right now. But there is a lot of work to be done after you get released from these rehab facilities, and a lot of times it's harder then because you are all alone. And I think that's where Darryl, more than anything, wants to try and be a friend to Delonte West. So if he ever does have that urge to use drugs again, he has somebody in Darryl Strawberry that he can reach out to.
Number 44 stands for destruction. I believe that I did a video pertaining to the number 42, and of course the ritualistic removal of Chadwick Boseman. And there was the Formula One race car driver Lewis Hamilton, who made sure that he dipped his cap and showed the number 44 to signify destruction.
That's been in his shoes before, and hopefully Darryl then can keep him on the right path.
You see how they ended it? This was the same photo that I highlighted earlier on in this video to show you the character role that Delonte West is playing within the industry, within the sports world. He was scripted in as an antagonist of LeBron James, who of course is playing, metaphorically speaking, Horus or Heru, which is a normal character role that they play for the quote-unquote hero that's scripted. Whether it's Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, they play Osiris/Heru. And the antagonists normally play Set, or the divine clown, the god of chaos. The tat on Delonte West's neck is for the quote-unquote divine clown, showing him as the real king. Also keep in mind that Set was red-headed as well. The young boy is wearing the Batman hat. The Batman is just a comic book version of Horus or Heru, the great avenger, the Dark Knight. But anyway, that's basically it on that, brothers. We'll see how things go with Delonte West. Please keep in mind that we're all going to go through things in life. We're all going to need help. But make sure that you're rooted in the right thing so that you know what to reflect back to when people try to pull you out of balance or out of whack, or situations try to pull you out of balance or out of whack. So peace.